What's up guys, it's the Cheapster here, back with another video, and I know everybody is so excited right now as a self-employed delivery driver because tax time is here and we all just love doing our taxes. I don't know about you, but I just sit around all year long just thinking about taxes and all the fun I'm going to have at tax time. Especially as a self-employed driver, knowing that I get to go through all my mileage and deductions, and usually in the end I get to owe money to the IRS. It is just such a fun time. But really guys, tax time is here, and as a delivery driver, knowing what you need to do and have prepared for taxes can be a pretty overwhelming thing. And I'm sure you've probably heard people say that paying for a good accountant will pay for itself easily, but at the same time, if you have a pretty simple tax situation, overpaying to get your taxes done could be a pretty big waste of money. So to have a good idea of what things you need to know yourself, I will be walking you through the things you need to know about what forms you will fill out, the income you need to claim, the deductions you can take, different options for filing your taxes, and how to keep up with the dreaded estimated tax payments if you need to pay them to avoid fines and penalties. I will say that taxes seem pretty overwhelming and scary if you don't know much about them or if you've never dealt with them before, but understanding the basic concepts can give you a lot more confidence in knowing what you're doing, and it may actually be a little bit more simple than you think. But also, just as a disclaimer, let me be very clear that I'm not an accountant or a tax professional, so all of this information is just my unprofessional opinion and should not be taken as a professional opinion. I always recommend that you research and get your own information or reach out to a professional for your individual situation. Also, side note, this video is 2021 and tax laws do change a lot, so make sure this info is still up to date when you're watching it. But most of this information is pretty standard and it has been for years, but you never know what could change in the future. So first off, starting out with the self-employed forms that you'll need to file. And let me quickly start off by saying that not all delivery services are self-employed, and if you receive a W-2 for a company like Bite Squad or something, you were not self-employed then and you will file as a regular W-2 employee. But if you did receive a 1099 NEC, which is actually a new form that used to be the 1099, then you are a self-employed independent contractor. And this is really common for most companies like Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and most gig work delivery companies. So if you did receive that 1099 NEC, you are a self-employed independent contractor and you will be filing a 1040 as well as a Schedule C and a Schedule SE. Now these forms do get a little bit complicated, and in most cases you might not really need to know exactly what's on all the forms, but I'll go ahead and give you a quick overview of them so you can at least understand what these forms are. So starting off with the form 1040, this is a pretty basic federal tax form that most people are going to file even if you're not self-employed. And this form just needs to be filled out with your personal tax info to figure out your tax liability. Basically, this form is just meant to collect all your income, deductions, and the amount that you paid in taxes throughout the year to figure out how much tax you would owe or are owed as a refund at the end of the year. So next, the form that sets you apart as a self-employed worker is the Schedule C. This is a form that you'll get very familiar with as a self-employed worker or an independent contractor. This is basically a side form to the 1040 that will collect all your info on your business's earnings and deductions. And that Schedule C form will feed back into your 1040 so that it can know how much profit and taxes you owe for that business. And a side note here, as far as I could understand based on what I researched, you can include all of your delivery driving on one Schedule C together if you work in the same field. So say if you drive Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber Eats, as far as I can tell, you just need to fill out one Schedule C that has all that info combined. However, if you do work for two different types of gig work companies like Lyft and Grubhub, where one is rideshare and one is delivery driving, as far as I can tell, you will need to fill out two separate Schedule Cs. So the next form you'll be dealing with is the Schedule SE. This is the dreaded form that nobody likes to deal with because it means you're going to pay more in taxes. So most people don't actually realize this, but when you work as an employee for a company, the employer is actually paying a portion of your taxes. This is called the FICA tax rate, and it consists of Medicare and Social Security tax. When you're employed as a W-2 worker, both you and the employer will pay 6.2% Social Security tax and 1.45% Medicare tax. However, when you are self-employed, since you are the employer yourself, you will need to pay for the entire tax burden, which equals a total of 15.3%, which is commonly known as the self-employed tax. And this name makes it actually a little bit confusing because it can be commonly thought that this tax only comes up when you're self-employed, but as I just showed you, that actually isn't true. You would still be paying half of that tax if you were employed at a W-2 company anyway, at 7.65%. So being self-employed only raises your tax another 7.65%. But the good news here is that there are a lot of tax benefits to being self-employed that can lower how much you owe in tax, as well as other business deductions that you can take that you wouldn't be able to if you're a W-2 worker. So I would say don't get too worried about this because as a delivery driver with so many delivery miles to deduct, you'll probably not pay as high in taxes as you might think once it's all figured out. So the Schedule SE is just a form that you'll fill out to figure out what what your tax liability will be for your self-employment tax. Or in another way of putting it, how much you're going to owe for Medicare tax and Social Security tax. Also understand that these might not be the only forms that you fill out for your taxes, because you may have other situations or businesses that you run. But as a delivery driver, this is probably the only forms you're going to commonly need to know about. See, really not too bad once you break everything down. So now getting into income and expenses, or what's known as write-offs for your business. These are the things you're going to need to know that will go on your Schedule C for your business. So first, starting off with income. For delivery drivers, this should be pretty simple because everything is usually just paid through the app, and it should all pretty much just be considered as income. And a note here, yes, unfortunately, tips do count as income, whether they're received digitally or cash. So cash tips do need to be tracked throughout the year for your taxes. And for most delivery drivers, that should pretty much be it for income. So expenses or write-offs that you can take for your business. The first one is one that we always talk about, and that is mileage, or you can take the actual vehicle expense. Now for the standard mileage deduction, which is what most people will take, it is 56 cents per mile that you can take deducted on your taxes. I actually made an entire video talking about tracking miles and how to do it correctly, so feel free to check that out. I will link it down below in the description. So the next thing is just for if you deliver on a bike, you could take your bike expenses and any supplies that have to do with delivering on your bike. Another expense you can take is any parking you have to pay while you're doing delivery, or any tolls that you have to pay while you're doing delivery. You also can deduct your delivery bags if you have to pay for them, or any other delivery items. Another thing that you can deduct is car items like phone chargers or car mounts if they're for your delivering. That's a nice one because it's usually pretty commonly overlooked that you can deduct that. Another big one is your cell phone and cell phone plan, and this is not as straightforward as just you can deduct it all, because you actually need to divide out how much of it is personal use and how much is business. So this part can get a little complicated figuring out how much of it you can consider as business. So I would recommend seeking more professional advice for what you can actually do for that. But as a delivery driver, you definitely should be able to take something as a deduction, but I would recommend getting more professional help with that to see what you can deduct. Another thing that you can take is a roadside assistance plan if you have one. This is another thing that needs to be divided between personal and business, but this one's a little more simple, where you can just take how many business miles and how many personal miles you drove throughout the year, and then you get to take that much of a percentage as a deduction. But that's a good one that I didn't even know I could take until doing this video. And another big one that you could take is tax prep fees or filing fees that you have to pay for doing your business taxes. You also can count that mileage if you have to drive to an accountant or a tax prep place to prepare your taxes for your business. But of course, those fees and mileage will be taken in the next tax year, because that's the year that you would have paid or drove those miles. And that's pretty much it for what's commonly an expense that you can deduct as a delivery driver. So now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about how to file your taxes. And there's basically 4 different ways that you can file your taxes. One is to file your forms yourself, another is to use an accountant, another would be to use a tax prep service, and then the last would be to just use a tax prep online service. So starting out with filing the forms yourself, this is not really a way that I would recommend that you do unless you have a good understanding of taxes, because it would be very easy to make mistakes just filling out the forms yourself. But if you have a pretty simple tax situation and a pretty good handle on how to do taxes, you could always just file yourself, and that way would be completely free, assuming you don't make any mistakes that actually cost you money. Most people are actually pretty surprised to find out that you can do this and you don't need a certified accountant to file your taxes. But yeah, it's a totally legal way to do it, to just get the forms from the IRS website, and then you could do it the old-fashioned way and fill them out on paper and mail them, or you could fill them out online digitally, what's called e-filing. So the second way would be to use an actual accountant. Now in most cases, if you have a pretty simple tax situation, I wouldn't really recommend going to an accountant, just because it might be a little bit of overkill and actually cost you more money. But of course, starting a good relationship with an accountant early, even if you have a simple tax situation, could be a good idea. But chances are, if you have a pretty simple tax situation, you might be overpaying because you could get this service done cheaper somewhere else. Also, just as a side note, just so you know, you don't need a CPA to file your taxes. This is a big misconception, and actually a lot of accountants and tax preparers are not CPAs. But back to why an accountant might actually cost you more money and be a little unnecessary. Think of this like you had a leaky sink faucet and you called a certified plumber to fix it. You can be pretty sure that the job will definitely get done well, but it will be a much higher price than a handyman or someone else who could have done it would have charged for it. So I would recommend making that decision a little bit more on what the difficulty of your tax situation is like. Of course though, in the case that you would happen to get audited, having an accountant to back you through the whole process would be a big plus. So the next way you could do it would be a tax preparer a company, this would be something like Liberty Tax or H&R Block. And this can be a decent place to get your taxes done and can be a good place to get physically face-to-face with somebody to ask questions about your taxes. However, these places are usually franchised and they can vary drastically in the quality of service and can commonly be known to make some mistakes. These places can be commonly seen as the fast food of tax prep. They just want to get as many returns done and processed as they can possible. So checking reviews on places before you go to a certain tax preparer would be a really good idea. And the last option is an online tax prep service. This is what I would recommend mostly for people who have a pretty simple or even a medium complex tax situation. Online tax services have gotten a lot better over the years, and I would say do a pretty good job of giving you accurate results and a user-friendly platform. TurboTax is a company I really recommend and actually use for myself, and with a lot of the delivery companies like Grubhub, you can get 50% off your tax services. Hurdler and Stride, which I both recommend for mileage tracking, are also companies that can do tax prep and file for you. I will link both of those in the description if you want to check those out. And I think the online tax prep services have a lot of benefits, like being able to do it from home, being able to start and stop working on it whenever you want, having all your data saved so that you can check it anytime, and even being able to calculate what you might owe from the current tax year using your past tax year, all at a really great cost. So this is why I recommend it, even though it also can make mistakes at times too. I think it's probably the best value for your money, and I think in the future that's really where tax preparation is going. Not to say that accountants won't always be needed, but for more simple tax situations, this is a really great option. So the next thing you need to know about doing your taxes, and probably one of the worst things you'll deal with as a self-employed worker, is estimated tax payments. So starting off with what it is, these are estimated taxes that you will need to pay throughout the year. Basically, this is meant to keep people from owing big tax bills at the end of the year that they won't be able to pay. Also, let's be honest, the government wants their money sooner. So who has to pay this? This can get a little bit complicated here, but the main thing you need to know is if you owe $1,000 or more in taxes at the end of the year, you probably will get fined. So the goal is to estimate your tax payments throughout the year so that you don't owe $1,000 or more by the end. And that will help you avoid being able to pay a fine or a penalty on your taxes. So how much do you need to pay? Well, estimating this can be a little bit difficult, but I would recommend using an app like Hurdler or TurboTax that can help estimate how much you're making throughout the year so that you can get a good idea of how much you should probably be paying. And as a rule of thumb here, it's probably just best to overpay just a little bit on your estimations so that you don't reach that $1,000 threshold and get fined. But estimating this can be a bit tricky, but hopefully you can get better at it as the time goes on. So when do you have to pay these estimated tax payments? What's common for most delivery drivers is you're usually going to owe per quarter, and those dates will usually be the 15th of April, June, September, and January. And also apps like Hurdler can help keep you notified of when these payments are due so that you don't miss them. So also a way that you could avoid paying these quarterly taxes is if you have a W-2 job also, or your spouse has a W-2 job, you could withhold at a higher rate on your W-2 so that your total tax paid in will be what you need at the end of the year. So for example, in my situation, my wife works solely as a W-2 employee, and when we got married, we kept her withholding at the higher single rate, and that made us pay more in taxes off each paycheck that she gets, which means all that money contributes to the pool of taxes we'll owe at the end of the year. But of course, this situation might not work for you because you may owe more in your self-employed tax than what you can withhold on your W-2. But if it can work out for you, it can be a pretty good way to avoid having to deal with the hassle of making estimated quarterly tax payments, as long as you can make sure that the tax owed at the end of the year will be below $1,000 to avoid those fines. But again, that's just a situation that I do, and it shouldn't be taken as tax advice, and you can look into it for your own situation. So hopefully now taxes can seem a little less overwhelming, and maybe you can have a better grasp on how they actually work. Understanding how your taxes work throughout the year can be a really important part in making sure that you track the right things so that you have all the information you need to get the most deduction at tax time. Also, again, remember that even though I try to make sure I have the most accurate information about taxes, I am not a tax professional, and I always recommend that you do your own research or reach out to a professional to learn about your own personal tax situation. This info is just from what I could find in my research and what I've learned from the years running my own businesses and filing my own taxes. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful for you understanding what it's like to file delivery driver taxes. I know it can be a pretty scary thing at first if you really don't know what you're doing, but it's really not too bad once you get the hang of it. And if this is the first time you've heard of taxes, who knows? Maybe next year you'll be paper filing and mailing it into the IRS yourself. Probably not. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys liked the video, go and do the cheapest thing you can today. Tap that like button. Also subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. And remember, stay cheap.
That's cheap. You still haven't subscribed? Oh my god, come on, what are you waiting for?